All right, so now let's say your editor is done and he's ready for an export. So first thing we're going to do is open the current cuts bin, and let's say there's all these different sequences ready for output. So we're going to make a new bin to export from because we never export out of the current cuts bin. So I'll click on the hamburger menu and click on new bin, and I'm going to name it outputs today's date. And then I'll drop that bin inside the outputs folder. Then I'll go over to the current cuts bin again and select all these sequences. I'll hit Command A. And now I'm going to Option drag all these sequences into the outputs bin. So I hold down the Option key and then click on the sequence icon and I'll drag it into the outputs bin. So what that did was it created a copy of all these sequences into my outputs bin. Then now I can close the current cuts bin and I'll hit Command S to save my outputs bin. Now, when you've got a lot of sequences to export like I do here, instead of exporting one at a time, you can do a batch export. And you do that by selecting all these sequences. And then you go up to File up at the top, and then go to Output, Export to File. Now, here's where you choose where you want to export to. So I'll choose the desktop, and right here you'll see options. So I'm going to click on options and export as. This is where you choose what wrapper you want to export as. So I want this to be an MOV, and I'm going to turn off use selected tracks and include inactive audio tracks, and use marks is turned off. Now that all these are turned off, even if you have a mark in or a mark out on your sequence, Avid will ignore it. If you have some tracks turned on, some turned off, Avid will ignore that. So it's going to export the entire whatever the contents are of the entire sequence. It will export. So now if we scroll down, we can see all of our export settings. Here's the preset 1920 by 1080. So that's what we want. I'm not going to change that. And 16 by 9 is correct. Pixel aspect ratio, I'll leave that alone. Frame rate is good. 30 frames per second, we're going to leave that the way it is. And keep as legal range and scale from legal to full range. I'm going to choose keep as legal range. Avid used to call this RGB and Rec 709. Keep as legal range. That will leave it as Rec 709. And if you choose scale from legal to full range, that's really RGB. So I choose keep as legal range because I don't want to change the output of the color. I would just want it to change. I want it to be as is, not change at all. So I'm going to choose keep as legal range. And here's where you can choose your codec family, DNX HD, DNX HR. Let's choose H.264. And for target bitrate, Now, this is going to be an export for someone to review. Let's say you're using an FTP or a file review site like Media Silo or Pix or even Vimeo. You want to make the specs more suitable for a producer to view on their laptop. So I'm going to change the target bit rate to 1.5 megabits per second. PCM, I want AAC audio. Stereo is fine. And instead of 1920 by 1080, I'm going to make this 1280 by 720. That's a good frame size for reviewing cuts. So let's review all this, make sure it's correct. 1280 by 720. The frame rate is correct. 30. Progressive. Keep his legal range. And the codec is H.264. And the target bit rate is 1.5 megabits per second. You've got the audio settings correct. And so once you've got all this, you can save your settings for later. I'm going to click on Save As. And I'm going to call this output. And then click OK. And now I've got a new setting already saved. So if I click on the drop-down box, here are all the presets already saved. This is my setting that I just created, output. And then I choose where I want the exports to go. And I have it saved right now, selected to the desktop. And then I hit save. So now all of these sequences are exporting. So once Avid finishes exporting one sequence, it'll move on to the next one, then the next one, then the next one until they're all done. You don't have to tell Avid to export the next sequence, it'll just do it automatically. That's the great thing about doing a batch export.